So Final Fantasy II is a really strange case. It seems that pretty much everyone I've seen talk about this game, or anybody I've talked to about this game, appears to really not like it. Constantly, I've seen this game donned as the worst game in the series, one of the most forgettable ones, and one of the most unplayable ones, if not the most unplayable game in the series. In fact, I've seen a lot of people talk about how they have quit on it, and didn't even give it a second chance. And a friend in particular that I've been talking to about this game really likes to express that he does not like this game and he thinks that it's very bad. And if I'm to be frank with you, even though I don't view it in as dim of a light as other people make it out to be, I can really see where their complaints are coming from with this one. And you're going to notice that in this video, there's going to be something a little off with the gameplay, or at least you might think that something's a little off with it, and that's because this is actually a patched version of the game. Because I started to notice the same issues that people were having with it. And really the biggest issue with the game is the fact that it's not a traditional JRPG. It tries some really weird mechanics with the leveling, and makes it a bit more streamlined, but in a really strange kind of way. We'll get into it soon enough, but just know that it was a bit much, and I'm not trying to put out these videos or these reviews as fast as I possibly can, but seeing as I'm a college student, I like to cut down on some time. And I might have been able to put up with Final Fantasy II with its issues, but I decided to take the path of least resistance and just go with the patched version, which just makes it less streamlined. It's not like it completely breaks the game. It just makes it so that Final Fantasy II plays more like a traditional JRPG in a sense. So there's these big mean guys that no one likes. They're called the Empire, and they're led by this guy called Emperor Mattius, and they ended up waging a war against Dazed and Kashuan. The rest of the world just kind of saw it as a, a skirmish between a couple of countries, but that wasn't the case. Not at all. What was originally seen as just a couple of dudes duking it out turned into a conquest for world domination. The Empire ended up getting the jump on everyone else because they didn't see it coming. So a couple of citizens of Altair, Furion, Maria, Guy, and Leon, end up getting caught up in the fray. They had nothing to do with it. They were just trying to escape the wrath of the Empire. And so you end up all getting killed, or at least so it seems, until you get put into a little revival chamber where you are brought back to life. Except for one fellow, Leon, Maria's brother, the guy with the slick blue hair. You end up going to another room and you end up chatting with this woman by the name of Princess Hilda. Yeah, where have I heard that before? But from that point on, she's pretty much assigning you missions to go from place to place to take back the world from the Empire, because they pretty much have the entire world on lockdown right now. And obviously, we don't want that. And that's pretty much the entire game in a nutshell. By no means is the story deep. I mean, you're not gonna get any thought-provoking moments. Nobody's gonna really make you cry. There's a couple of sad moments, but it's not really deep. But I mean, for a game that was made back in the 80s, I mean, it was pretty engaging actually. I mean, characters have motives, they end up dying sometimes. Sometimes even your own party members, yeah. So, yeah, no one's the exception here. Your party members die a couple times. So let's get something out of the way really quick. The visuals. It's nowhere near as colorful as Final Fantasy 1, but the sprite work is still A1 stuff. It's amazing. Something really cool in this game, everyone gets a portrait. Well, pretty much everyone anyway, not any of the side characters or the really unimportant ones. But anyone that's important, they get a portrait, and that's kind of cool actually. The only thing that kind of bothers me is the fact that the portraits don't really match the art style of the rest of the game. They're kind of photorealistic in a sense, not completely, but they look more human. It's a little disturbing, I can't lie, but it looks good nonetheless. I still enjoy it. I still think it's pretty cool that everyone gets their portrait, and they have several portraits based on the mood of the scene, how the characters are feeling. It's really cool stuff. It's definitely an upgrade from Final Fantasy 1, I'll tell you that. Something that is also very nice in this game, and honestly I could not get enough of it every time I saw it, and that is the high detail cutscenes. They are amazing. I am surprised that a game with a story as simple as it is got cutscenes with such nice detail that just looks so nice, and they're very well animated too. I'm just saying, if your game can be put down the controller and I still enjoy myself and I'm really liking what I'm seeing, that's pretty good. Although, something that kind of disturbed me about the game's art direction, at least versus Final Fantasy 1, because this is on the same cartridge, have you mind, on the Dawn of Souls collection, is that the map is way uglier. I mean, like, you'd almost think it was a different game kind of ugly. Like, it looks like it's from the Atari 2600. I don't get this. It's really strange to me why it looks so artistically inconsistent. And you have Final Fantasy 1 with this detailed map that had so much care put into it, and then you get Final Fantasy 2 which just looks like an awful mess. it looks like it's from the 70s or 80s. It's weird. The music. Just like Final Fantasy 1 on the Dawn of Souls collection, it's some killer stuff. In fact, the music for this game got more stuck in my head than in Final Fantasy 1. And let me tell you, I still can't stop humming the stuff from Final Fantasy 1. I don't know who remixed these tracks, but they did a killer job, let me tell you. I can't stop thinking about these songs. And, you know, take it from a guy whose memory is a little hazy, I'm not the best at remembering details, I'm gonna be honest with you. But I can pretty much hum like every Final Fantasy 1 and 2 song so far. And somehow I feel like it's gonna get worse and worse. If we keep getting this kind of quality from Final Fantasy games, I'm gonna be a jukebox. Although, the soundtrack of Final Fantasy 2 is a lot gloomier than the soundtrack of Final Fantasy 1. In FF1, you get this really cheery and upbeat music. And even if it wasn't really cheery and upbeat, it still had a very fantasy-like feeling about it, you know? Just really kind of lighthearted in a sense. Final Fantasy 2 is a totally different story. FF2 is kind of militant and serious, and it conveys a completely different mood and story to the player. Now, this by no means makes the soundtrack inferior to FF1. In fact, I would pretty much consider them equally as good. Final Fantasy 2 is just a lot different. In fact, I can't get the freaking Rebel theme out of my head. That will not stop playing. I heard that song so many times. So the gameplay of Final Fantasy 2 really starts to shake some stuff up. There are no classes in this game. Not at all. Nope. Not a single one. Classes are gone. And I'm sure to some people that is already off to a bad start. I mean, for me, I don't really care, to be honest. I know some people, from what I've heard, really like the job system, and who knows, it'll probably get to a point where I really like it. In Final Fantasy, at least at this current point, I don't really care. But I'm sure it'll get better. I hope it will, anyway. Or even if they don't do that, maybe it'll get nicer, who knows. Anyway, there are no classes in this game, just characters that are better at doing certain stuff. Which, I mean, I guess you could say those are classes, but you really aren't given the option whether or not you want them as classes, so they're not really classes, they're just more like characters with their own quirks, if you will. So first up, you get my main man, Furion. This guy's just kind of a balance, there's really nothing special about him, so I just kind of gave him dual swords and just called it a day. You know, whatever, I mean, it was kind of cool. Maria's a little tricky, she's pretty alright at magic, and she's pretty dang good with bows, actually. But she's a little strange, I'll get to her in a little bit. My main man, Guy, dude is awesome. Really good with heavy weapon stuff. He can take the most hits, and he can dish out some serious damage. Although, every enemy wants to kill him. Just like my freaking Black Mage from Final Fantasy 1, so I'm getting some flashbacks here. Everyone wants to kill Guy. Probably because he's the strongest, so I mean, at least it makes sense in this context. Final Fantasy 1, they just want to keep killing my Black Mage. That was mean. Leave Stella alone, alright? Don't be rude. Minwu is kind of like the Black Mage of this game. He's the only character that is really good at magic. Because, Magic has some issues in this game. Something else we will also get to later on in this video. Joseph is, Joseph? I mean, he punches. But I don't really care for, like, bare-fisted characters. I'd rather have characters that are a little more weapon-focused. Gordon was actually pretty okay with magic, but where he really shined was with maces. Gave him a mace that was good at killing undead enemies, or were enemies in particular, like werewolves and whatnot, or were-squirrels, or whatever. Really good at killing monsters with that mace. He was awesome at it. My main girl, Layla, her damage kind of sucked, I'm not even gonna lie, but this woman is fast. I mean, this lady is out of here. And her magic was actually pretty alright too, but I mean, where it was really at with her was just how fast she could do anything. She'd almost always get to do the first move of your attack phase. That was cool. In fact, she was pretty much ahead of any enemy too, so yeah. Layla was pretty awesome. Ricard he just deals okay damage. I mean, he has a lot of health, but I don't know. Ricard was just okay. I mean, he was alright. I just kind of didn't like him too much. But Leon? Because, yeah, of course, you get Leon later on. He's like the second tankiest character in the game, and he's pretty awesome. He's got some really good magic spells. They're really good about actually working in your party. And the dude hits pretty hard, although partially due to the fact that he was previously known as the Dark Knight. But yeah, Leon's pretty cool. Final Fantasy II has a notably higher amount of weapons. There is a bit of a problem with it though, and that's the fact that it really doesn't matter who you give what. I felt like there were minor differences. Some weapons were not as accurate as others, while others seemed like they would increase the dexterity of characters a little bit, you know? Like, of course, the guy with 2 knives in his hands is gonna be faster than the dude with 2 axes in his hands. You know, it just kind of makes sense, you know? But for the most part, I couldn't really see a difference. I just kind of gave everyone a dedicated weapon. Except for Maria, because Maria is absolutely awful at using anything melee related. I mean, like, she is bad at using melee weapons. But bows, oh, that lady's killer. In fact, I gave her the flame bow and she was just ripping everything apart. So I'm sure you just recalled like a moment ago that I said that Minwoo was the only guy that was really good with magic. The reason I say that is because magic in this game is awful. Like, really, really awful. And you know why that is? Because there is no damage multiplier. And that is due to the fact that there is a more streamlined leveling system. So yeah, that system starts to, it starts to get a little weird, and this is where you start seeing people complain about the game quite a bit. But we'll go into more of that in a little bit. But yeah, the magic starts off so weak that the damage output of your weapons quickly outclass it, and it's kind of to the point where, you know, you're like, what is the point in investing in magic when I have weapons that can get the job done faster? I mean, of course, magic can get to a point where it's way stronger than weapons, but I mean, with all that time you're spending trying to level up the magic and it's just in such a weak state, I mean, you might as well just stick with the weapons and just keep beating everything to death. And trust me, you can do that. We'll get onto that as well. You know, even that ultimate magic known as Ultima was really not that good, at least when it started off. So I actually forgot it was there. So the best magic in the game is something I forgot to use, and not once did I need to use it. Since I really don't know where to put this, we're just gonna get the towns and the dungeons out of the way really quick before we further delve into the issues of Final Fantasy II. The towns in this game are less varied, but I actually think this is for the better. Because one of my biggest issues with Final Fantasy I was the fact that several towns had their own thing. So if you were looking for a specific item or so, when you run into a town, they may not have what you're looking for. And I get it, that makes the towns a little more generic in Final Fantasy II, but I kind of like how everything is just kind of everywhere, except for magic, which I understand because you don't want to get some of the strongest magic in the game near the beginning. I understand that's stupid, you know, you don't need that happening. But the fact that, you know, the general necessities are in every town, I like that. That's a good change. I didn't like how they had it in Final Fantasy I, it was stupid. Although, almost every town starts to become unavailable. And yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit. There's a lot of delaying in this video. I would say for sure that the dungeons in this game are a huge step up from Final Fantasy I. So one of my issues with Final Fantasy I's dungeons were, like, you know, even though I like fighting the enemies in them, they were just more or less a series of arenas for the most part, you know, with occasional twists and turns and getting a little more complex, but usually they were a little more on the openish kind of side. There was just a bunch of snake rooms and then one bigger room. Final Fantasy II is, you know, it's similar to that, of course. You know, you can only do so much with Final Fantasy's top-down formula, but it's definitely neater looking, more believable, aesthetically more consistent. So I definitely like that for it. As opposed to something like the Flying Fortress where, you know, there's that one part where you're just in a big open area and you just kind of, it's just kind of big and stupid and kind of dumb. A lot of dungeons in Final Fantasy II are notably longer, but they're just more well designed. So the pacing for the game, story-wise, is actually pretty good. I like how they lead you on, how new conflicts arise and you have to deal with it at the very moment. The only issue that comes with this is that some moments are ham-fisted, but the pacing gameplay-wise. And so yeah, now we're gonna get into the part that everyone likes to criticize about Final Fantasy II, and to be honest, rightfully so. Now you guys know me. You know, I like to consider myself maybe, you know, a little bit of a free thinker, you know? Don't like to follow what everyone else thinks. I don't like to voice what everyone else voices because I find that to be uninteresting. But I will voice my opinion on a popular idea or mentality or consensus if it just lines up right. And this is one of those cases. So Final Fantasy II's combat is deeply flawed. And this is why most people consider it to be one of the worst games in the series. So for one, EXP was removed. Why? I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe to help encourage the streamlined leveling system, kind of like we see in a lot of Western video games, a lot of Western RPGs, you know, like Skyrim, you know, you keep doing this ability, and you'll get better at doing it the more you practice it. But the problem comes with the fact that it is so strictly bent on whether or not you do that. So, leveling doesn't feel as progressive. It's just a matter of, can you hit hard with this weapon? Yes or no. You know, if you suck at it, then your damage is really, really low. So experimentation is kind of hard to pull off in this game. Kind of forces you to stick with one weapon, which again, I know that I said that I didn't really care too much for the job system, but at the same time though, if you're gonna give me a set of options, don't really make it more of an illusion of choice. Make sure that if you're gonna give me options, there are actually options there for me to pick. Not just pick one of these and then stick with it for the rest of the game. That is bad game design. And your damage doesn't really scale up, again, because of the lack of EXP. It's kind of strange. It's not very good, to be honest. And also because leveling is strictly tied to whether or not you do something, the game gets kind of tedious if you want to practice with something. Even if you want to try something new, let's just say you're tired of using the same old weapon and you want to switch to something else, that's like a good hour or two of grinding just to make sure that it catches up with a nice amount of damage. Let's say if you want to go a little faster with, like, say, dual knives or something like that. Not as accessible as you might think, but that isn't the part of the game that makes everyone wants to quit it. The health system. It's stupid. It's dumb. So take a wild guess as to how you would level up your health and level up your defense. If you guessed getting hit, you would be right. However, this system is broken. Severely broken in the vanilla game. The health leveling doesn't start off so bad, but then the enemy's damage starts not cutting it for you. You start leveling up slower, your health isn't going up as much, your defense isn't going up as much. So what do you have to resort to? Beating up your partners. Yeah, actually like killing yourself. Or at least to near death. It's really not that bad, but the problem is that you have to go up to an enemy and, you know, just kind of stall and just beat up your own party. You gotta hope that you don't knock yourself out and don't wipe out your own party. It's awkward and it's kind of tedious, and I'm sure if I had stuck with this game some more that the beating yourself to death thing wouldn't be as bad. But the fact that the first few hours of the game or so forces you to do this, that's not good. That's a very poor impression. And this is how you get all people to just stop playing your game. I mean, this is just not good. What really doesn't help the situation is the fact that the earlier you are into the game, the more hotspots there are. And by hotspots, I mean areas where enemies are way stronger and way faster than you. To the point where if you encounter them, it's hopeless, you are going to die. The biggest issue with this is the fact that you can't tell what is and isn't a hotspot. Not to a newcomer anyway, not unless you look up a guide. So what ends up happening is that you just kind of end up wandering around looking for the next objective, going to place, and all of a sudden, running into these guys where you deal only like 2 damage to them, and they're dealing like 3,000 on you. And you can't do jack squat about it. You just got locked into a fight that you cannot win, and there is nothing you can do about it. That is irritating. Now, thankfully, there is an awesome little bird friend in this game called the Chocobo, which lets you ride past any hotspot. In fact, any hotspot of any degree completely goes away. In fact, you won't even run into normal enemies. It's gone. I guess because the Chocobo outruns everything, so enemies don't have time to catch up with you, which I guess would make sense, you know, if the Chocobo's fast enough. So for a good while, actually, I would just ride the Chocobo around because I didn't feel like being bothered with being forced into a fight that I could not escape and just not win. You know, that wasn't cool. So I would just ride the Chocobo around. Just call it a day. I mean, it was a nice solution. I mean, you get the Chocobo a good 4 hours into the game, but I mean, hey, Chocobo's pretty cool. And at least they kind of knew what was going on. But that kind of bothers me because that shows that Square knew that the hotspot issue was utter garbage, and they're just like, just throw a Chocobo in there, it'll be cool. I mean, hey, maybe they weren't thinking about that, because I mean, there are some long distances you have to cross in this game, and the Chocobo was way faster. But somehow, I feel like they couldn't have done that without thinking about the awful hotspot format, and just think about how bad it was. And something else regarding the game's combat and difficulty that's not good is that you get hit with these random temporary points of no return. Like, you go into a dungeon, and to an unsuspecting player, you get locked inside the dungeon, so you might end up saving inside of the dungeon, and you can't go back out to buy some resources. So let's say you run into a dungeon, and you're like, oh shoot, I need to go back out and get some more ether, get some more potions. Yeah, no, you're not doing that. And yeah, there's usually not vendors inside of dungeons. So, if you boarded a dungeon, and you didn't stock up yet, let's just say you didn't think to do it, you know, we're all human, that's understandable. If you forgot, your file may or may not become dysfunctional. And, sorry, that's awful. That's not good. I've seen a couple people talk about how, like, they would have, you know, they were already frustrated with Final Fantasy II as they were making their way through it. And then they hit a point where maybe they make a mistake, they overlook something in their inventory, or maybe they're just not quite leveled enough yet, and they end up with a dysfunctional profile, and they just can't beat it anymore. Again, you know, I don't think FF2 is as bad as some people make it out to be, but I completely understand the reasons for why they hate it, and I think they are completely entitled to those. And actually, I got pretty close to that point, because at one point, I boarded this ship called the Dreadnought, which is a giant battle airship that wrecks some serious shop, man. And I boarded it without thinking to get some potions. Next thing I knew, I was locked onto the Dreadnought, so I couldn't go out, and I almost ended up with a dysfunctional profile. In fact, I was scared that I was going to start the entire game over again because of this, which I would have been really mad about. So, I may or may not have beaten this game without the balancing patch. I think it would have been doable, but again, my tolerance with grindy turn-based RPGs is a little squirrely, I can't lie. I usually don't have much patience for it, I just don't for some reason. But I absolutely refuse to skip over 2 and go straight to 3. I just don't want to skip it. So I saw the mod of balance and I'm like, better safe than sorry. But let's say that the points of no return and the weird health leveling system isn't enough to get you down. It ain't bothering you, or you're just not running into much of an issue as other people are having with the game. This doesn't stop the huge gaping flaw with Final Fantasy II's combat system. Too many problems. Almost every problem, in fact, can be solved by just attacking or holding the A button. Now, enemies in this game are noticeably stronger than the enemies in Final Fantasy I, but they're still not that much of a threat. I mean, enemies with magic are definitely way more dangerous than enemies with physical attacks, but even magical enemies are not that dangerous in Final Fantasy II. And I get how I'm playing a patched version of the game, which cuts down on some of the time I need to put into leveling up my characters. You know, it takes the streamline aspect away from Final Fantasy II. So I don't have to focus so much on it because in this patch, you'll pretty much level up regardless of what you do. You don't have to focus dead on a task to level yourself up. Just fighting enemies is usually enough to boost your stats. But even with that in mind, it shows that even if you got to a point where your health was looking pretty good and your defense was looking pretty good, the combat is less sophisticated in this game than Final Fantasy I. And Final Fantasy I is a game that already lacks depth in combat, so what does that tell you about Final Fantasy II? And what really kind of gets me a little bit is the fact that in this patched version, it actually takes longer to level up weapons. I mean, I understand, again, I don't have to focus dead on using them to level them up now, you know, it's not as focused. But you still have to put quite a bit of effort into actually trying to level it up yourself. So vanilla FF2 is still there to a degree. It's just been watered down a bit. But it shows that it isn't so much the new leveling system itself. It's really just the health and defense problem, the vitality issue, the methodology of it. All it does is just get in the way. So really, when you take out just the vitality leveling issue of it, Final Fantasy II is kind of mediocre in the gameplay department, I can't lie. It's not that great. I mean, I do like the weapons in this game. I mean, the sound design and the animations and just the overall feel you get of using these weapons. They feel heavier and stronger than they did in Final Fantasy I. I love how they sound. The sound design in this game in general is amazing, by the way. It's fantastic. And using the weapons feels great, but again, I played about 15 hours of this game, and the vast majority of it was holding down the A button. If I had played the original game, once I got past the health issue, I would just be holding down the A button. So yeah, Final Fantasy II's combat is kind of a downgrade, to be honest. At least Final Fantasy I encouraged variety, you know? You can't have your black mage run around with knives, it's not gonna work. But in Final Fantasy II, save for Maria, just give anyone a melee weapon. Again, it really doesn't matter who you give what. So just give a weapon to someone, give them any weapon, and then just hold the A button. Just let them beat everything to death. The only time I really had to use strategy was against bosses, but even then, not really. Usually I could just maybe apply one buff and then just have everyone go ape and just beat it to death. Although I'm sure I didn't even need to use buffs for that. So I gotta be honest with you, Final Fantasy II is carried more by its story and character interactions as opposed to its gameplay. There is, however, an exception. Do you recognize that tune? Because I sure as heck recognize it. Yeah, that's the Magician's Tower, or the Mysidian Tower. This place is lethal, it's brutal, and juxtaposed to the rest of the game, this place just kicks some serious butt, man. If you didn't think much of the magic abilities Confusion and Stone, trust me, it will be ingrained in your head by the time you're done with this dungeon. Get ready to see your party members getting stuck and not being able to do anything, or beating each other to death. Yeah, it doesn't feel too nice, but if there's one thing I can take from it is the fact that I actually had to stop holding A and actually think about what I did. So that was actually good. Now, frankly, I think the Magician's Tower might be a little too hard. I mean, it's a little unforgiving. Especially these guys called the Gyguses, and not as in Earthbound's Gygus. In Final Fantasy 1, they were kind of these half-naked superhero dudes, and in Final Fantasy 2, they're just kind of they're just giants, I guess. I don't really know. They're Gyguses. I don't know what that means. But at the end of each floor, there was a Gygus, and these guys were themed after that section. My least favorite one was the Thunder Gygus, because he was the strongest, and his lightning abilities hurt quite bad. But eventually I found out that all I had to do was stop worrying so much about my party members, stop healing them up all the time, and just let them die, use a Phoenix down on them, and then just keep fighting. And eventually I did win. Barely, but I did. The thing that gets me about Final Fantasy II is that the rest of the game could have been on a similar level to the Mycelian Tower. Especially since we're playing a remake of the original Final Fantasy II, I find it a bit appalling that Square didn't take notes that parts of the game were way too easy and make a reinterpretation of the challenge. I know that I myself enjoy difficult JRPGs, so I would have welcomed this with open arms. I know that would have made the base game a little more unplayable, but at least it'd be nice to know that once you caught up with the game, it was a nice and fair challenge. So how about we wrap everything up here? While you were journeying through the Magician's Tower, the Empire started a worldwide genocide by a cyclone. This thing destroys, like, everything? Just about everything anyway? So the vast majority of towns are now unavailable. Hey, I actually got back to something. But to skip ahead a little bit, you kill Emperor Mattias and he goes to hell. Yeah, I'm not even joking. You kill him and he goes straight to hell. So Mattias, a dude who didn't even take all that much to kill, goes to hell, kills Satan, claims authority over hell, and then comes back as the Emperor of Hell. Yeah, it's weird. He extends the castle of Pandemonium, which is the capital of Hell, into the land of the living, and destroys the castle of Palamecia in the process. It also ends up killing your partner Ricard, who was stalling Mattias so that you could escape. So your goal now is to go through the Jade Passage, which is the gateway to Hell for some reason, and kill the Emperor of Hell. I would say that the last two dungeons are difficult if it wasn't for one weapon, the Blood Sword. Oh man, the Blood Sword is something else. So in order to obtain the Blood Sword, before you go into the aforementioned Cyclone, this is actually before you kill Emperor Mattias, you go to Paul's house, and you tell him that you're going into the Cyclone, to which he tells you to tap on a secret wall and take some of his weapons from his secret stash. One of those weapons is the Blood Sword. And let me tell you, if this isn't the most overpowered piece of garbage that I've seen in a game. So not only does the Blood Sword deal high damage, but it automatically takes a 16th of an enemy's maximum health. And this is anything that you hit. Nothing is an exception here. It also converts that high damage you deal into health. And not like a portion of it, all of it is converted into health. There is no compensation. So you deal like 6,000 damage to an enemy, you get 6,000 health back. Just like that. So you know what ends up happening? I give it to Furion, and I only had to heal this guy like one time after I gave him that. That's just how overpowered the Blood Sword is. Because bosses obviously have a lot of health, you could just rip them apart. For instance, if a boss has, in the simplest sense, 16,000 health points, for each hit, you take out at least 1,000 damage. Now, that's not including the weapon in your other hand, because you can dual wield with this, and that gets added as well. So you're just dealing this insane amount of damage to the bosses. And so, for this reason, that the Blood Sword is so overwhelmingly overpowered, it's kind of hard to properly judge just how hard the last two dungeons were. Now, I know I could have just taken the Blood Sword off, but why would I? What's the point? It's the strongest weapon in the game, so, I mean, shoot, why not? Although I will say it is nice because Castle Pandemonium has a lot of monster-in-a-boxes, which usually contain bosses. So the Blood Sword is good for getting those out of the way, but even then, any challenge that's been put up against me was overcame by the Blood Sword. So yeah, it was a fairly mediocre finale. I mean, even the final boss was a joke with this Blood Sword. Believe it or not, it took me 5 turns to kill the Emperor of Hell, the final boss of the game. If you exclude the first turn that I had where I purely used buffs, it took me 4 attempts, 4 turns, to kill the final boss, because of the Blood Sword. And apparently, the Blood Sword is Furion's favorite weapon, because pretty much in any promotional art that you see of him, he's always donning it. And I mean, can you blame the guy? The moment he has that thing, he pretty much cannot die. But let's move on. So in a similar fashion to Final Fantasy 1, everybody but one character got to see the final boss die. In this case, it was poor old Maria. So after the Emperor of Hell just kind of blows up, Firion and the gang sort of just casually leave Hell, I guess. I mean, I guess you could just do that, just walk right out. And you meet up with Princess Hilda over at Fen Castle. So now it's the usual, we're just gonna go patch up humanity, that old good stuff after the final boss has died. Hilda, Nelly, and Gordon are off to, handle their business or whatever. Oh, by the way, Nelly is the daughter of Joseph. Which, oh yeah, by the way, a couple characters died in this game. That being Scott, who actually isn't a part of your party, but he was the brother of Gordon. Scott ends up dying. The king ends up dying. Minwoo ends up dying. Minwoo's the, the little magic guy from earlier. The black mage, basically. He was awesome, but he ended up dying. I already told you about Ricard, he's gone. So yeah, a couple people end up dying in this game. It's kind of sad, not too emotional, especially since a lot of character deaths, when the death theme starts playing, the moment their body fades away, it just kind of like fades out and it just goes back to whatever music was playing before, so it really sucks you out of the scene. It's a little jarring, I can't lie. It kind of sucks a little bit, but whatever. It's still kind of sad. And you do end up seeing the ghosts of the characters watch you as you walk off, so that's a little sad. But as for the rest of the gang, your friends come and congratulate you. Leon, who ended up pairing up with you after Ricard died, decides that with his past as a Dark Knight, he can't move on with Firion in the game because he feels like there's just too much tension, and he'd rather just kind of leave his past life where it is. Firion, Guy, and Maria kind of come to an understanding and know that Leon is just kind of uncomfortable where he is right now, so they understand and they just let him move on with his life. But they let Leon know that if he ever wanted to come back, they would welcome him with open arms. So a little bit of a bittersweet ending to it. So again I say, Final Fantasy II is a strange case. So on one end, I really enjoyed my time with it. But on another end, I never really came to hate it, but I found it to be pretty mediocre. I mean, the music, the story, and the themes make the experience really enjoyable, really engaging, Again, nothing too deep, but I mean, it gets the job done. I cared enough to see how it was gonna end. But the gameplay just can't keep up with the rest of the quality, and that's quite unfortunate. And even at Final Fantasy II's best, it's still not as good as 1, which really sucks. While I can say for certain that Final Fantasy II is a game that I enjoyed, despite its flaws, can I really say that it's a good game, even though, as a game, it is incredibly repetitive, with or without the patch for different reasons? Now, I will say that I myself did not mind for 15 hours holding the A button to win everything. But that doesn't excuse the fact that it still sucks as game design. That's still not good. And it's this polarizing state of Final Fantasy II that makes it one of the most forgettable games, it seems, or at least from what I've seen on YouTube. And this is saying quite a bit, since generally if a video game song exists, you can find an extension of it on YouTube, but it's kind of hard to find songs for Final Fantasy II, kind of period. I mean, of course, you'll find the song if you look hard enough, but trying to find the one you want, even the PlayStation 1 soundtrack, it's kind of hard to find it. And that's saying a lot when we're talking about Final freaking Fantasy II over here. I mean, it's a Final Fantasy game. So, to wrap this review up, if I were to be frank with you, I'd say that my verdict for this game is mixed. The game's overly ambitious nature takes the wheel a lot, and it ends up in a lot of people wanting to forget that the game even happened. Personally, I'd say that if you're interested in a fairly decent, albeit pretty simple narrative, then give the game a go. But if you're looking for a more balanced RPG experience, I'd say just skip it and go to 3 instead. You're really not missing that much.